So hello everyone, and welcome to this CCSE conversation. This is an initiative of the Centre for Culture, Sport and Events of the University of the West of Scotland. And the centre has developed from a collaborative partnership between UWS and the Renfrewshire Council. CCSE provides a space to undertake collaborative research and development work that has local, national, and international relevance. So today, for this conversation, I have the pleasure to have Joanna Maranhão with me, and she's a Brazilian Olympian, survivor, advocate, and researcher. She holds a Master's of Sports Ethics and Integrity from the University of Leuven in Belgium, and a Bachelor in Physical Education from the Faculdade Maurício de Nassau in Brazil. And as a professional swimmer, Joanna specialized in individual medley and distance events, participating in 4 Olympic Games and winning 8 medals at the Pan American Games. A survivor of sexual abuse in sport, Joanna is now an advocate for and a researcher on athletes safeguarding, having just successfully defended her thesis on the prevalence of interpersonal violence among elite athletes in Brazil. Previously, Joanna led the campaign to expand Brazil's statutes of limitation to allow survivors of child sexual abuse more time to report and seek justice, succeeding in establishing a new law which bears her name, Law Joanna Maranhão. Currently, Joanna leads the Sport and Rights Alliance scoping project for a global survivors network, consulting athletes across the globe with lived experience of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse to assess their interests and need for an international network to facilitate greater exchange, advocacy, and support for athlete survivor. First, it's a pleasure to have Joanna Maranhão here. One, because I'm a big fan, as someone who loves sports and watched a lot of her races and swimming, including in Rio, when I was actually there watching her. So it's nice to have you here, Joanna. Thank you for your time. Thank you for participating in this moment for the CCSE. I really appreciate. How are you doing? I know you were in Germany and it's almost break time there probably, but I hope you're okay.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's I think we're an hour apart, but it's all good. I mean, we're parents, so it basically means that we don't have schedules. So there's no such thing as lunchtime and time. We just do what we need to do whenever we can.
All together. Yeah, exactly. I already dropped the little one at nursery and it's all good.
Same.
Good. So, Joanna, first of all, obviously you had a brilliant career and you've been to 4 Olympic Games. I want to hear a little bit more about, you started very early. I think if I'm not wrong, you were like 17 when you went to Athens, the first Olympic Games. So I want you to tell me a little bit about that experience as, high performance elite athlete. How was for you, and how was for you to participate in these games?
Yeah, so I started to swim at age 3 because of safety. We're from Recife, that we have we have oceans and rivers, and we go to swim pools, and it's warm. Like we don't have winter. It's like 28 degree is the coldest for us, so we're always bathing in waters. So knowing how to swim was an instant survivor thing, and that's why I started to swim. I was always like average in everything in my life, and I pretty much think that I am an average person. But
that's like me. So
yeah, no, really, but in swimming, somehow it was easy to me to understand what the coach was trying to say and then replicate that on water. I didn't know that meant that I was talented for sports, but that just made me curious. It's like, I want to see where this is gonna take me. Whereas for my friends, it was just that like a sport that they used to play, after school. To me, this was like getting serious. Like, I want to know I want to master the 4 strokes. I want to have a good technique, and I want to be fast at it, and I want to see where this is gonna take. So it was really at the beginning based out of curiosity. And of course, I started to compete, and it was very pleasant because it was new for me, and my family was always there in the stands. I cannot say that I wasn't early specialized. Yes, I was. I was a national champion at age 14. So I was doing like doubles, you know, and doing weight training and so on. So yes, I was specialized, but that was not the problem, the major problem of my career, because I chose that. I wanted to be a professional swimmer. No one pushed me. I was the kind of person that I knew where I wanted to go. So as a consequence, everything just happened. So when I went, the first national competition was in Japan. So I broke the national record. And then I made the team for the Pan American Games in the next year, where I got third, and then made the cut to the Olympic Games. So I went to the Olympic Games, and that was like that.
That was
I
very
mean,
fast, is it not? Like, because, you know,
it
when you
was very
started,
fast.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like
And
3 years.
I honestly, I think that the major problem there was that because in Brazil, we don't have a lot of quality swimmers. I mean, we're a big country, but swimming is not one of the most popular sports. The expectations were very high on me. So uh, it wasn't as fun as it used to be, because people were like, whoa, what is she going to do now? Oh, she was fifth at the first Olympics. So obviously she's going to make to the podium in 4 years. And it's not how it works, especially someone who went through what I went through, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are those aspects, but overall, and besides the abuse, it was an amazing experience, and I am very thankful to sports.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, obviously, it's all very young, and it's funny because I remember I did physical education at the university as well, and it was 2000, before 2004. I was like third year university, and I remember like the whole expectations that I was already in a 17-year-old, which is very young, like the whole hopes of the country and the way we talk about this idolization of athletes, and I can imagine how hard that was for you, coming from the background that you had in terms of, you know, and the situations of abuse that you had as well. That was obviously, I'm sure that was very problematic there for you. But in terms of the athletes' experience there at the mega events, how is this conversation about well-being, you know, human rights, child rights? You know, like, I guess you went through the Olympics, the first Olympics, and the second Olympics and this first Olympics before you open up to all the abuse that you had. And is this something that people talk about actually at the Olympics? Is that something that people actually, you know, chat?
You know, actually, we dive into this bubble of performance in a way that we breathe sports the whole day. You know, everything else is just like, you just have to do it. You know, like school to me was like, I have to pass, because if I don't pass, then I need to keep going to school and I won't have as much time as I need to train. So everything else didn't matter to me. I was just so focused into like how fast I wanted to go in the pool. And I mean, this is good to some extent, and this is bad into another extent. There's this whole romantic view of the Olympic Games and so on. And this is true. This is there. There's like magical thing, like the same. It's a similar from what I felt when I went to Disney for the first time. That's how I felt when I entered an Olympic Village for the first time. It is magical. It is beautiful. There's this atmosphere and this environment and so on. But we cannot neglect the fact that for something so big to happen, we violate tons and tons of human rights for the people that live there. They're already there. But this conversation doesn't exist between athletes, because usually those athletes who raise those concerns are usually seen as too progressive, you know, the troublemakers, and competitive sports overall is a very conservative environment. I mean, we are advancing to some extent, but the conversation doesn't happen. It's usually like organizations that try, like the Sporting Rights Alliance that I'm working at right now. But between the athletes and the staff, especially the staff, like the staff, they do not want us to talk about it. I mean, because I mean, anything that's gonna take us from the goal of the, you know, from my lane and to make me swim the fastest 400 IM of my life, they see anything as a problem. So like, we can talk about this later, or it doesn't matter, or the government is taking care of it. I remember when we were in Rio, and I mean, I was already almost 30, so I was grown up, and I had like, I mean, I have matured and so on. And I remember that we didn't pass anything. So the other athletes, they couldn't see what needed to be done in order for those structures to be built.
to be
It was
beautiful.
another Rio. I mean, I've been to Rio, you know, I know how Rio is. That was not the Rio. So yeah.
Kind of a Disneyland. I think there is a good comparison there. But it is, there's also, do you feel that there is something about like athletes and Olympians in general are like heroes, are they not? Like they build those images of heroes. Do you feel that there is something about like the society thing about, you know, they can, heroes do not show fragility, even if it's a silly thing, right? Because, you know, every single hero in the history of humanity always had some kind of fragility. But there is something that, okay, you cannot show your fragilities, or you cannot see fragility. You just need to concentrate on that.
Yeah, I think there's that, and the fact that it is physically and mentally so exhausting that we are, I mean, elite athletes are, and they need to be dehumanized to some extent in order to perform. There's no way that you can say that what I've been through in terms of training, and every Olympic athlete, that is healthy. It's not healthy. You know,
Yeah.
it's not. So the mentality around elite sport is that if you don't talk about the problems, it may seem like they're not there. Now we're starting to see, and I'm loving to see that, like Olympic champions, like Adam Peaty last week, he just posted on Instagram that he's like, I'm not happy with sports. I'm not doing well. I'm not going to do trials. I'm going to come back later. This is awesome because, I mean, they're humanizing Adam Peaty. It doesn't matter to me if he's going to go 55 again or, you know, 25 150 breast. It doesn't matter. I've seen it. He's amazing. He has done it. I wanted to be healthy. He doesn't have anything to prove. And the same thing with Simone Biles. So when we see those outstanding athletes, you know, publicly talking about, I mean, I honestly think that showing your vulnerability is a sign of strength.
Yeah.
But in elite sport is seen somehow as a weakness.
Yeah, and I think it's nice. It's like, I was saying, like it's nice to see like some kind of change, slow, even if it's taking much slower than we expected as more progressive minds in terms of humanizing, as you're saying, athletes. In terms of like these people have family, they have kids, they have parents, they have a series of mental health issues that it's proved that like the consequence, the the impact of sport in mental health and competitive sport can be quite brutal. Now, you mentioned something interesting about Rio, and obviously that was your last Olympics, and you were kind of more mature in terms, you had all the experience of previous Olympics, but you've been to two of the most, let's say, controversial Olympics, which was probably Beijing and Rio, in terms of impacts on community, in terms of hiding away all the problems and the social issues that we have. Not that didn't exist in London, and that is well documented that London also had problems with that, and Athens had problems of that, and other countries have problems of that. But obviously, like Rio and Beijing were huge in terms of human rights and communities. Is that something that you said that you knew, but you felt that the athletes coming to Rio didn't feel or didn't see that? Is that something that happened also in Beijing? Is that something that happens? Is that really a bubble inside where the athletes and they don't engage with protests and everything that is happening outside?
Yeah, and then there's another thing there. There's the Olympic chatter, like you pretty much tell us what we can and what we cannot do. And overall, we're trying, within some movements to make the IOC allow athletes to organize and stand up for whatever they think is right. There's the Rule 50 there, there's a lot of silencing around. To be honest with you, particularly in Beijing in 2008, I was just going through so much because I recently disclosed my story, and I was in a very dark place in terms of performance and like going through my past. And I don't remember much about Beijing, and I remember after that people talking, but from like I remember people talking a lot about Athens and a lot about Rio, and not talking much about London. London people didn't ask much about the problems that were there. There are in every city, because the problem, like when you do the bidding process and then you win, like you have a nice project that you have to go back and forth a million times to make it like sustainable to some extent. Then comes the international federation. those are the one who ask, you know, I want my sport to be here. Like you have the project in the bidding process. Like, I want to do wrestling and judo in the same arena because we're going to save millions. And then the international federation says, I want judo to be here because I want all of the attention to judo, and I want all of the staff to be in the, you know, 5-star hotel and so on. So it's not just the hosting country and the bidding process. There's the whole politics involved in it, you know?
The federations,
And
yeah.
the international federations, they play such a major role. Like, I would say if you go into research, you know, in terms of sustainability and bidding process within the Olympic Games, they make it so much costly, so much more costly. And they are the ones, like, we spend so much money with them, with the international federations. You know, I mean, we're gonna see it in Paris. Like, some sports want, you know, like the most touristical and pretty venues for their sport to be in. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the most sustainable way to do it. Yeah.
It's more like fight for status and, you know, probably sometimes economic.
100%. 100%. So you need to do the whole thing of like talking to one president and the other president. Can we, you know, trying to find a middle ground and so on. I mean, I would never be able to do this work. I don't ever want to work with this.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, you've been to world championships as well, many of them.
Yes.
Is that the same? Like, in what way that differs in terms of engagement between inside and outside world? You know, like, we know that at the Olympic Games there is this kind of Olympic village close. Everything is very directed. Yep. It's you know, it's pretty much protected from everything that is outside. But what about the World Championships? Is that the same, or that you guys have more flexibility in terms of?
No, it's way more flexible because usually the team stays in hotels. So
instead of villages,
hotel, where I don't know, 3 or 4 teams in the same hotel. So I think that the only thing that is similar, obviously, is the facility. You know, the pool, because they're like the rules, the size of the pool, the quality of the pool, the water temperature, so on, the stands and so on. And you know, the bus line that has to go through all of the hotels where the athletes are. But apart from that, we just see our competitors in the swimming pool, while at the Olympic, in breakfast and lunch and, you know, dinner, you see them all the time. So that's a bit different.
And is that a moment in your career, in your competitions, that actually you looked around and said, we shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be in this city. We shouldn't be in this country.
Yeah.
It's not really right.
I actually, I hesitated to try to make to the Rio Olympics. There was an inside conflict in me because, like, I was able to do it. I mean, I was able to do the A cut and do it. So quitting wouldn't be fair to all of the hard work that I put out there. Yeah. But at the same time, I was accepting all the wrongdoings, you know? Yeah. So it was a huge conflict there. Like, what should I do? But in the end, I just thought, you know what? I'm not going to do this to myself. I'm not going to give up to go to another Olympic Games in my host country because of something that I had zero opinion. No one has asked about my opinion. So, you know, it's not all my fault. Yeah.
And I think there are other ways for you to raise the concerns about, like, you know, you do very well in terms of your activism, in terms of raising concerns, including the things about, you know, the law that we have under your name, and trying to change the things that, you know, you can. And obviously, like, you know, as an athlete, I'm sure, like, to compete in your own home country when you know that is probably your last Olympics and things like that, it was a special one. And would you be able to tell me a little bit more about this law that comes to your name? You know, you talked about a little bit about your history of abuse, and then how before the Beijing Olympics, you know, that came out, and, you know, and it was really complicated. But what about, you know, how did you go from there to say, well, I need to push this to be a change in Brazilian legislation and make sure that athletes are protected?
Yes. Story. I didn't have the intention to report him at the time. I just wanted people to understand that this is what is going on with me. I'm not swimming slow, or I'm not very grumpy at competitions because I hate swimming. I'm just going through so much. So let me keep trying to stay in this environment. This is going to take a while. That was basically my rationale behind telling people I was sexually abused at age 9. But once you do that, what I didn't think was that I didn't say at age 9. I thought when I was a child. That means that all of my former coaches were potential abusers. And I remember one coach that was the coach after this guy, that he came to me and said, he was so kind to me. He said, people are accusing me. Like, I knew that there was something wrong with you because I saw that you came back so different once you trained with him. You were so like, you didn't trust me. So I had to like win your trust all over again. But I didn't know what it was. I just thought that maybe he was, you know, aggressive to you or too hard on you. I could never imagine, but people are accusing me. So I was like, yeah, I do something. So that's when I started to understand what advocacy was. And I was 21, so I couldn't report him because I was over 18. So that's when they called me on Senate on the following year to go there, you know, like, let's try to pass this bill that's going to change the statute of limitation. And I think it was the first time in my life, if there is a sense, if there is a meaning into a 9-year-old being sexually abused and raped, as I was, this was it. You know, like and I'm not talking in a religious way, you know, like I'm not saying that like God has done this to me so that I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I didn't have a choice. He did that to me. What the hell can I do to prevent or help people? And also because since I didn't have justice to my own story, this is a way to heal my own wounds.
Yeah.
So that's why I kept on pushing it, and it has taken me to where I am today.
It's interesting because it is like that process of reparation and almost like regeneration of your soul in terms of, I need to make sure that no one else goes through what happened. And as we know, and you know, it's well documented, you know, had cases like that in the American gymnastics that became very, you know, famous, but also in many other sports. Do you feel that, you know, how did you feel in terms of the other athletes and their engagement with some kind of advocacy and things like that? Do you think that there was a development from that point? Because to be honest, like I may be biased, and obviously in the history there are lots of athletes that were socially, politically engaged and trying to transform things. But you know, yeah, we had like Socrates in Brazil with the, you know, against the dictatorship and all those things, and there was all these debates. But in more recent history, you know, you probably have been the inspiration that I had to say, okay, actually we have someone who really wants to change the world. Do you feel that your case actually inspired other athletes to really become more advocates of, you know, change?
I don't know if I have inspired people to advocate, but I think definitely the message is out there, as in you should talk about what's hurting you and don't keep it to yourself. If it hurts you, someone needs to be responsible for it. And sport has, I mean, especially competitive sport has always been this place of, let's just pretend that we're outside of society, that we're different, that we just hold those moral standards and higher values, which to some extent I agree. Like I said, what I felt when I entered the Olympic Village was just one of the most amazing experiences I've ever felt in my life. But we are within society, so we share the same burdens. Like, if there is sexual abuse in society and emotional and physical abuse, that's going to happen in sport as well. So we have denied this for a long time. And because we have this power, you know, those power imbalances that they're so specific within sports. And I always say this, like, teacher, I said this to my German teacher. I said, like, I can see your frustration when you're talking to me in German. I'm not understanding a word that you're saying, but you're not going to hit me because I'm not understanding, or you're not going to yell at me. You're going to try to find ways for me to comprehend, right? Within competitive sports, when an athlete doesn't perform, to some extent, we allow these people within power positions to hit, to yell, or to do something worse. So that's the difference. And that's something that is so naturalized in sports that it's not just people within power position. That's like athletes perpetrating those violence between athletes. So that's what we need to break, is the logic behind.
And that's the thing. Like, obviously, you talk about the Senate and the law in Brazilian government, right? What about, you know, you've been an athlete for many years. Did you see that those changes also at like federation and the Olympic Committee, did they change in terms of how they safeguard children, how they safeguard athletes? You know, what are the things that happened between 2004 and 2016, or minimal or nothing?
They're driven by scandal, you know.
Oh yeah,
Once
yeah,
a
yeah,
scandal hits the media, then they act, and that's what we keep telling them. And when I talk to those federations and those institutions, I try to talk like to do the money talk, as in it's gonna be way more costly to you to deal with a scandal, rather than you just acknowledge that this is happening in your sports, regardless if you have any case that you know about or not. This is happening, you know. And usually what we see as more severe, as in attempted rape and rape, they don't start out of nowhere. They start from those microaggressions or low level concerns. And by low level concerns, I want to be very respectful here. That doesn't mean that they're not significant. They're just low level concerns. So they start and they progress all the way to something that is more severe. So the problem is that the sports, usually it's like they're driven by scandal. And that's also something that we try to make them aware that they are responsible for it. And they cannot wait for a scandal to happen, that they need to be corrected.
So basically they treat the case instead of making systemic changes, do you feel, in terms of, you know?
Absolutely. That's also a problem, to think as let's take this bad apple out of here, and then we solve the problem. And it like, try to think as a, you know, like, let's say there's a systemic doping scheme in Brazilian sports, and then every year an athlete gets caught, and then you punish the athlete, and then you punish the other athlete. Are you dismantling the doping system? No, you're just catching the athletes. It's the same thing. When you catch a perpetrator, which is something that you should do, we should punish them. It doesn't mean that you dismantle the logic of violence that is within that environment. So just punishing them is not enough.
And that's interesting because, you know, your masters, and I want to take to your masters now, that's something that you looked at, right? You looked at this huge level of violence somehow in Brazilian athletes. And you did over, you know, 1,000 surveys, if I'm not wrong, with Brazilian athletes from all different levels. Is that right? So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the safeguarding researchers, they have been since in the 80s. They have started and they have faced a lot of, I mean, if we face resistance nowadays, think like in the 80s. And it was like a British lady called Celia Breckenridge. She was like, she's the mother of the safeguarding movement in sports. We wouldn't be where we're at today if it wasn't for Celia back then saying, hey, this is happening in sports as well. Well, everyone would say, of course. Those researchers, they create those instruments to measure the prevalence. So what I used was a Canadian instrument, and that has been applied in Canada, Australia, Belgium as well. And I had 1,043 participants. So they responded to an anonymous survey on their experience before the 18 in sports. So we do the whole statistical analysis, and we find is that 93% of them went through at least one type of violence, psychological, physical, or sexual, before the age of 18. And sexual violence was at like 60%, and physical violence at almost 50%. So this was very high, like way higher than any other country that have done either the same survey or a similar survey. So that raised the question, as in, maybe within the global south, because this was the first study in the global south, maybe we're facing something that is way higher than we think of.
And is that also aligned to like systems of reporting and mechanisms to report those? You know, do you think at least in Brazil, do we have sufficient systems of report? Is that something that exists and happens?
It's starting to. They're very recent, and they're not effective, because I've heard from someone that has been working on the field is that we haven't found a way out yet. No one has a solution. If there is no sports free from harassment, so we haven't found the solution yet. If the UK, that started this ahead of everyone else, still have cases of harassment and abuse, even though there's so much stuff in place, so we cannot for a second say that we have solved it. So Brazil has just started to have One of the problems is independence and autonomy. Most of those systems, they are not trauma informed, so they do more harm than good. They don't do the proper questions. It takes months and months. They don't protect the victim. They traumatize the victim even more, and the people are from the federations and so on. So it's really hard for the athletes to trust what's been put in place. So in my humble opinion, when it comes to Brazil, our system, like 92% of the money that goes to, you know, the National Olympic Committee, that goes to the federation and the clubs and so on, comes from the government. So to me, this has to be attached to safeguarding measures. So we need to pass bills on that behalf, and I've been trying to advocate to it, but at the moment, people are not listening to me.
I'm sure they will at some point. You've been very brave in all those things. In the UK, and that's out of my curiosity, and you know, even if I'm here in Scotland, is that at a federation level, or is that usually the Olympic Committee of the countries who have those channels of reporting, communication, support? You know,
They should be in every level. They should be at the highest and at the low level, and it's really important to work in continued communication, because think of like a child. Something happens to a 12-year-old child. The first person that this child is going to talk to, if talks to, it's someone that he or she trusts, right? And it's very unlikely that's going to be to the safeguarding officer from the National Olympic Committee. So you need to have someone at the lower level as well that is communicating, you know, sending reports, so we can better understand what's going on, what types of violence. Are they more like physical violence, emotional violence, sexual violence? And if there's sexual violence, so what are the nature of them? What can we do? How can we be effective? So yeah, there's still tons of things to do.
And is obviously, I guess that's not really the role of the ethics council that you're the president currently. Like you're just tackling the reported issues. Is that right? So what is the role of the independent ethics council of the Brazilian Olympic Committee, and what's your role there?
Yeah, so the ethical council, we're 5 people, and one good thing is that we were elected, so we have some level of independence. But the problem is that we volunteer, so it's a whole lot of job, and we're not getting paid for it. I'm not just talking because of me. I'm talking because people need to be paid, because this job is too
professionalized.
Not to be paid. Yeah,
you need to professionalize.
So yeah, so the complaints come either through the athletes commission, through the hearing system that it's in the website, so you can do this anonymously or not, or through the compliance officer. But everything's going to go to the compliance officer and his team. He's going to do the first investigations, you know, talk to the person, to the victim. Can you tell me more about it? Try to collect evidence. And if he thinks, okay, so we have substantial evidence to open a case, so he's going to forward this to us. So we're going to get together, we're going to read the initial reports, and then we're going to decide who's going to be in charge of this one. And then we're going to accept the case or not. So that's basically, and then we ask for a hearing, you know, the victims and the people who are the alleged perpetrator. So we do the hearing and we listen to everyone, and then we decide on a sanction. So that's basically what we do. I like the system, but by no means, 5 people, 5 volunteers, and 1 compliance officer, it's going to be enough to deal with all of the ethical violations from the Brazilian Olympic movement. No way.
It's a huge country with lots of artists. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And do you guys have sanctioning powers, or do you make recommendations to the Olympic Committee? How does that work?
We do have sanctioning powers when there is violation from the ethical code. So so there is the code of ethics, and the sanctions are based on that. And we always discuss, and we try to reach like an unanimous decision, and we try to listen to people who are in favor and against. Like now we're dealing with the athlete said that one athlete at social media said that he would shoot the president in the face. So we're dealing with that, like pros and cons, the polarization. Well, what should we do? This was a very complicated case. There's a lot of good arguments in favor that do we have the competency to deal with that, or do we not? In my opinion, we do, and we should do something, as we did. But yeah, so we're based, but we can also suggest. especially in terms of education. And that's something that I've been trying to do. I've been like creating letters with lots of reference to the National Olympic Committee or to the federation saying, hey, you have a problem. The case has been to us. We have sanctioned the perpetrator, but here's something else that you can do. So I suggest them in terms of, you know, educational efforts and so on.
Educational programs and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. And obviously, as I said, like you've been an athlete, do you see like Brazilian Olympic Committee moving in the right direction? Do you you know, in terms of supporting athletes, supporting young athletes, you know, are we different, any different from 20 years ago?
Well, compared to 20 years ago, we're better than 20 years ago, absolutely. But especially in terms of safeguarding and representation, we're way behind. Okay. We're way behind, and I keep trying to bring them, you know, like because I think that we need to be evidence-based, because and that's what has pushed me to do the masters, because there was always my story and me sharing my story, and people were like, we're tired of listening to you saying what happened to you. So I'm like, okay, so I'm gonna give you evidence that this is a problem in sports. So, you know, I think that being evidence-based is critical, but we need to have better athlete representation. Active athlete representation, not as in, hey, do you want to come to the, you know, like, hey, we have the athlete here. That's not athlete active representation. That's not what it means.
And do you have allies? Do you feel that you have allies? Because what you not is a huge fight that you have in hand, and you know it's quite inspirational in terms of how you like your bravery in terms of really trying to make systemic changes. Do you feel that you have allies within the athletes community, and how is being the support to all your activism?
I think to some extent, and I've been getting more and more people to respect now, because like I said, when I disclosed my story, it was a shock to the Brazilian community, and everyone was like, oh, here comes the troublemaker. Oh, she's talking about depression. She's talking about she's trying to kill herself. She's just trying to justify because she's not swimming fast enough. So after I retired, and then I did the masters, and I'm doing the advocacy, and the international communities respect me, like the IOC is asking me to come to the table, and FIFA. So now people in Brazil are like, oh, so maybe we need to start listening to her, which is ridiculous, but that's how things
work.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's how things work. And I talk to this to my husband all the time. It's very sad that I had to go through all of this to leave my country in order to get respect from people for something that I've been telling about since 2008.
Yeah. I think like the hope that we have is things are moving forward, and I think that it is amazing how like your strength in keeping the fight and keeping, you know, moving things forward. And I know you should celebrate every step, because you know you've done so much beyond the swimming pool. You know, obviously you've been you were an amazing athlete. You know, to be an Olympian is hard enough. To be 4-time Olympian is even harder. But I think like the trophies that you collect for your advocacy, for your activism, for the changes that you've made, it's to Brazilian sport, but also to influencing sport overall. It should be applauded, and it's really good to see that you keep going, you keep pushing, and and you're very brave and inspirational in many levels. Joanna, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the center for this conversation. It's been really, really lovely to obviously first meet you, first time, you know, after exchanging emails. And for me, it's been a pleasure to have a chat with you. And I know, just to let you know, that we are here to support you as well. I'm here to support you with whenever you need. And you know, I'm sure that there is a lot of people around the world that, you know, are there for you as well in your fight, and your good fight to making sport better, to make performance sport better, to make events better, or sport events better. And I'm sure that hopefully we'll get there at some point in the future.
Thank you for the kind words, for the invitation. We need to keep fighting the good fight. You know, there are good and bad days. You know, there are days where I'm just so fed up that I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, just want to raise my
Don't
kids.
Do that. Don't think like that.
But no. But then at the other day, you just take a rest and then you go back to the fight. No, I'm not alone. There are a lot of allies. We're getting together. We're organizing ourselves. We're not going to see the change, but we're going to be a fundamental part of it. So yeah, they're good things.
And I think it's important for me to, just before we finish, to really highlight the work of Sport and Rights Alliance. So if people are interested, they can go to sportandrightsalliance.org. They do an amazing job in many different areas in terms of sport events, impact, and so on. Is there anything that you want to say about sport rights and rights impact?
Yeah, I started with them last year as an external consultant on like talking to survivors as in should we do this network or not, and then we worked on together fundings, and now we did get the funding. So for the next 3 years we're going to build this international network of survivors, like from any kind of harms in sports. So people are allowed to come in and go. Every single survivor that provides a service, you know, a workshop, anything, they're going to be financially compensated for their participation. We're going to have emergency funds focusing on the global south, because we do need to focus on these people that are at higher risk. We're going to do advocacy. I mean, there's so much to do. We're just starting. We're starting, you know, with the governance structures and so on. But I'm looking forward to it. It's not easy to deal with survivors' expectations. This is something that it's very challenging. But we want to do this collectively in a less hierarchical model, you know, like more like a linear model where we try to listen to everyone's voice and decide as a group. And, you know, keep in good conversation with the big sport organization. We need to have a conversation with the IOC and FIFA and UEFA and so on. They need to listen to us and really listen, not just to Joanna, but as a network of people who are affected by violence in sport. This is the kind of expertise that they need to take very seriously moving forward.
So thank you so much. And again, it's been very interesting to talk to you. Thanks for your time. I know you're very busy.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks a lot. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye.